bring in our panel. Peter Harcher, political editor with the Sydney Morning Herald, and Paul Kelly, editor-at-large at the Australian newspaper. Very good afternoon to both of you. Thanks for joining us. Look, we'll come to Labor and some of the criticism we just heard from the Greens leader. I mean, obviously the Greens would say this, but is Anthony Albanese a bit too compliant at the moment, waving through government legislation that Labor's not happy with? But I want to start with the government. Here's what Scott Morrison told the Coalition Party Room meeting today in Canberra. Quote, "Where there are issues that need to be explored, I would urge colleagues to use the internal processes available to each of us. If you go outside of those processes, it is showing disrespect to those who you are sitting next to, showing disrespect to other colleagues." In other words, pull your heads in, stop freelancing on policy in the media. This in the context of government MPs taking a position that the New Start allowance should increase, that nuclear power should be rolled out, or that the superannuation guarantee shouldn't go up to 12%. Peter, he's hardly the first Prime Minister to want to control things a little within the ranks, but he's meant to have all this authority at the moment. He gave them a similar warning a couple of weeks ago, but some clearly haven't got the message.
Yes, there was a lot of breathless commentary just after the election, wasn't there, David, about the tremendous authority that Scott Morrison would now bring to the job. But the task of party management does not go away for any Prime Minister, no matter who they are and no matter how authoritative. The best news for Morrison is that none of these outbreaks are aimed specifically at him, unlike the last four Prime Ministers, where a lot of the restiveness and talking out of turn was a deliberate destabilisation tactic. This is more the simple and permanent fact that when you bring a bunch of MPs together in Parliament House, there's an ambient level of energy, always. The question is, how is that energy channelled? And it's the task of party management to channel it, to bring the party together and channel the energy constructively. Lecturing them won't work. Trying to command them to silence through so-called authority just doesn't work. It takes party management and it takes the constructive channeling of energy, or the problem is not going to go away.
Yeah, Paul, I don't see any nuclear, New Start or the superannuation ones as big problems for Scott Morrison. They're all manageable. You're always going to have some MPs taking different views, slightly different views, agitating for this or that. But Peter's right there. It's the way you manage that as Prime Minister. I mean, how do you read it at the moment?
David, I think we've got to draw the distinction between MPs speaking out on the one hand and ventilating their opinions, yet on the other hand being in full-scale revolt against the Prime Minister, against the Prime Minister's policy direction and against the policies of the government. Now, what happened with the previous government was that the latter occurred and the party and the government was reduced to chaos. Now, that is not the situation now. All Prime Ministers get frustrated when backbenchers speak out. Scott Morrison has indicated that. I think he's got to be a little bit careful that he doesn't create an environment in which whenever an MP speaks out, this can be interpreted as some sort of infringement of Scott Morrison's authority. So he's got to get the balance right, he's got to get the consultation right. There's got to be some leeway for MPs to ventilate opinions, and he's got to ensure, of course, that that doesn't spill over into full-scale revolt. Now, that's not happening. There's no sign that that will happen. That's a fundamental point, because Scott Morrison is all about demonstrating that this is a new government, that the party has changed with the departures of Tony Abbott and Malcolm Turnbull.
On the Labor side, there's no open revolt there either, but, some do privately and perhaps not so privately wonder whether it's the right approach on the tax cuts, now on the drought fund and also on the foreign fighters exclusion order bill, raising concerns but then getting out of the way and letting the government pass its legislation. Paul, to you first on this. What do you make of the Albanese approach when it comes to some of this stuff?
Look, the first point to make here, David, is that the election result, while it's close, has been a transforming event. And Labor is now on the defensive. Labor has got fundamental strategic and identity problems to sort out between its own faiths on the one hand and where the Australian public is on the other. the government, the Liberal Party, has become the party of political aggression. Now, we're not used to that because we haven't seen that for a number of years, given all the trouble that Tony Abbott and Malcolm Turnbull went through. So essentially what's happened now is that Labor's got to improvise. It's got to work out the best way to manage this. It's not easy. I don't think the tax cuts were handled well by Labor, because they continue to campaign against the tax cuts, then at the end of the day wave them through, making it absolutely clear to the entire world that they were voting for a tax cut package that they didn't support, that they didn't believe in. Now, this is the dilemma. I think while ever the government is putting up legislation and bills which have got a wide degree of public support, Labor's got no option but to support those bills. It's got to be very careful about where it draws the line and fights.
And that's the point, Peter, isn't it? It is difficult. I mean, it's easy for the Greens to say Labor's being too weak here, but imagine the alternative if Labor voted down tax cuts, if Labor voted against national security legislation. Boy, they'd be copping it from the other side.
Yeah, there's a sort of a willingness to see the Labor Party bring on some oppositionism for its own sake. But the main task here for Albanese is to take a traumatised, bruised party and try to nurse it into the next phase. The priority here for him is to keep his party united, is to try to work out where they want to have their fights and where they don't, but in the process keep the party united and prevent any great outbreak of recriminations. We're just talking about the government attempting to do some party management. Well, this is what Labor has to do, and it's really the priority for Albanese. They're 3 years from an election. They've just finished one election. They're still working out their priorities, and Albanese has really got to try and nurse the party to that next phase of working out their priorities and where their lines in the sand will be, and they've only just begun that process.
Yeah, it's a long way to go yet in all of that rebuilding. Peter Harcher, Paul Kelly, good to talk to both of you. Thanks very much for joining us this afternoon.
Pleasure, David.